Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we are diving deep into the really fascinating world of academic entrepreneurship theories. But look, we aren't just going to look at these as abstract, dry textbook definitions. Instead, we're going to explore them as a distinct toolkit of capabilities. Because whether you're building a tech startup or a local restaurant, success almost always comes down to mastering specific, learnable skills that allow you to navigate the unknown. But before we actually open up that toolkit, I want you to ask yourself something. Why is it that certain leaders can navigate absolute market chaos while others just freeze completely? I mean, the answer isn't just about having a great idea or good funding. It really comes down to the specific capabilities they possess and exactly how they deploy them when the pressure is absolutely on. So let's take a quick look at our agenda. We're going to unpack 5 fundamentally different capability frameworks you need to survive the high-velocity startup lifecycle: the entrepreneurial capability toolkit, tolerance for and uncertainty, ambidexterity, dynamic capabilities, resilience, and we'll wrap up with the generalist advantage. Let's get right into it.
Starting off with Section 1, the Entrepreneurial Capability Toolkit.
So in strategic management, the overarching foundation of how a company behaves is known as its entrepreneurial orientation, or EO for short. And this isn't just about the mere act of starting a business. It's a very specific strategic posture a firm adopts to sustain an advantage over time. Think of these 5 distinct dimensions as a strategic engine for a firm. You absolutely need innovativeness to support new ideas, proactiveness to secure those crucial first-mover advantages, risk-taking to commit resources to uncertain outcomes, competitive aggressiveness to outperform your rivals, and autonomy to actually empower your team. Working together, they perfectly illustrate the exact processes required to sustain a competitive advantage in a fast-moving market.
Moving right along to Section 2, tolerance for uncertainty.
Well, before a firm can even operate and utilize those 5 dimensions we just talked about, a founder first has to step into the unknown, and that requires a profound psychological baseline capability. The crucial point here is the difference between calculable risk and true uncertainty. See, taking a risk is kind of like playing at a casino. You know the odds, even if they aren't exactly in your favor. Uncertainty is a whole different beast. It's operating where historical baselines and odds are completely unknown. Take Katrina Lake, the founder of Stitch Fix. Back in 2011, she pitched a model blending data algorithms with human clothing stylists. Investors naturally wanted historical consumer baselines and risk metrics, but those literally didn't exist. She was operating in absolute uncertainty. So by manually buying inventory on her own personal credit cards, she demonstrated this elite capability to bear that unquantifiable unknown.
And this brilliantly illustrates our next example of ambiguity tolerance in action. I mean, look at SpaceX. Between 2006 and 2008, their first 3 rocket prototypes basically detonated. The company was facing total operational chaos. But there, President and CEO Gwynne Shotwell didn't freeze. Instead of waiting for absolute technical certainty to figure out exactly what went wrong, which, let's be real, would have taken months they simply didn't have, she used what we call effectuation logic. She focused on her immediate available means: scrap data, hardware they had on hand, and her deep client relationships. She actually convinced NASA to keep their faith and bought the company just enough time to successfully launch their 4th rocket. That right there is ambiguity tolerance as a pure survival capability.
All right, Section 3, ambidexterity, exploring and exploiting.
So building from that raw psychological tolerance of the unknown into true operational agility requires ambidexterity. Successful founders have to balance totally contradictory objectives. They are constantly pivoting their mental models between early-stage exploration and late-stage exploitation. As an ambidextrous entrepreneur, you can't just be a dreamer, and you can't just be a doer. You have to be both. Exploration is all about search, risk-taking, and raw ideation. Exploitation, on the other hand, is about refining those ideas, efficiency, and heavy execution. If a founder gets stuck in just one of these modes, the venture is eventually going to stall out for sure.
You can really clearly see this evolution in startups like Instagram. In 2010, the founders launched an app called Bourbon. It was cluttered, and honestly, it was failing. But instead of just exploiting and optimizing a bad app, they shifted into pure exploration, stripped literally everything away, and found that users basically just wanted to share photos. Boom, that birthed Instagram. We see the exact same thing with Stitch Fix. Katrina Lake explored manually at first, literally shipping boxes out of her apartment. But to scale to a $1.6 billion IPO by 2017, she had to shift the company's capability completely into algorithmic exploitation, heavily optimizing margins and warehouse logistics.
Next up, Section 4, dynamic capabilities for survival. As a company actually scales into a larger enterprise, it faces the constant threat of technological disruption. And this is where we learn that just doing things efficiently isn't enough. You have to adapt to do the right things. Now, traditional business theory, which is known as the resource-based view, told companies to acquire and hoard rare, valuable resources. But as researchers Eisenhardt and Martin pointed out, in high-velocity markets, hoarding static resources is basically a death sentence. Hanging on to what worked yesterday, even if it's highly efficient, will absolutely destroy you when the market shifts overnight.
David Teese's three-step micro-foundations framework perfectly illustrates how you build a dynamic capability. And Netflix is just the perfect example here. They were incredibly efficient at mailing DVDs, but they survived because they didn't just aggressively protect that static resource. No, first, they sensed the convergence of broadband internet. Second, they seized the opportunity by launching a digital streaming platform. And third, they totally transformed their organizational structure by building an internal, data-driven studio to produce Netflix originals. They systematically abandoned their obsolete capabilities to build brand new ones.
We can directly contrast two totally different approaches here to really drive this home. Look at Nokia. Back in 2007, they had an incredible static resource bundle, this massive hardware supply chain, and the Symbian OS. But when the iPhone shifted the entire market to software, Nokia's static capabilities totally blinded them. They just couldn't adapt, and they collapsed. Compare that to Ginny Rometty at IBM. She possessed high-velocity dynamic capabilities. She intentionally starved IBM's highly profitable legacy hardware units to fund aggressive exploration into the hybrid cloud, which ultimately let her orchestrate the massive acquisition of Red Hat. I mean, she purposefully disrupted her own company just to capture future growth.
Which brings us to Section 5, Resilience, Bouncing Back. Of course, even if you have amazing dynamic capabilities, things are inevitably going to go wrong, which introduces our next crucial toolkit item, resilience. Now, it's widely considered one of the most critical traits any founder can possess. But we have to be really careful about how we define this. Entrepreneurial resilience isn't just about passive toughness or, blindly taking a beating. It is an active, gritty, and aggressive capacity to convert desperate environmental limitations into actual strategic fuel. It's the ability to adapt to asymmetrical shocks and process brutal skepticism without ever losing your core focus. Let's look at two incredible examples of this capability. When Airbnb was deep in debt in 2008 and facing operational collapse, they didn't just passively wait around for funding. They used their resourcefulness to manufacture custom political cereal boxes, folding them in their own kitchen to raise 30 grand in raw capital just to survive. Or look at Jessica Alba. When she was pitching The Honest Company, investors totally patronized her, dismissing her as just a celebrity. Her resilience was incredibly active. She spent 3 years mastering toxicological, chemical reports, and building material traceability profiles to completely dismantle their systemic skepticism. That active resilience, that's what keeps the engine running.
And finally, Section 6, the generalist advantage.
Let's explore Edward Laziar's somewhat controversial jack-of-all-trades theory of entrepreneurship, which really challenges how we typically view technical specialization. Instead of being highly specialized in just one single domain, this theory argues successful entrepreneurs actually must wear a lot of hats. Think about a new restaurant owner. If they are only good at cooking, they're probably going to fail. They have to manage vendor selection, execute marketing and promotion, design the menu, handle hiring and training, and even persuade investors. They basically have to be a generalist.
Now, while academic evidence on this is admittedly a bit mixed, with some studies showing specialized innovators also do incredibly well, the core takeaway is that having a diverse, balanced skill mix is very often an incredible strategic asset. Building a balanced portfolio of general competencies allows an entrepreneur to see the whole board, essentially connecting the dots across different functional areas when they're venturing out into the unknown.
So, as you reflect on this explainer and evaluate your own capability stack, I want to leave you with this final thought to consider for your next venture. Are you relying entirely on being a master of one single skill, or are you actively developing a dynamic, ambidextrous, and resilient toolkit ready for the unknown? Because the choice of which capabilities you build today will absolutely define how you survive the market chaos of tomorrow.